we believe founders and all team members really need to be really passionate and really committed to hiring, always talking about hiring, always talking about what are the standards that we have for our company. What does that bar look like? What do our needs look like? What are our expectations for these individuals that are joining the company? And rather than having just the founders own it or the CEO own it, really having every team member within the company part of hiring and part of the decision-making process. Having everyone involved in the interviews, having everyone involved in coming together and making a decision, is this someone that we're going to hire or not hire? And there's so much research that shows if people are involved in decision-making processes, they're much more committed to the outcomes of those processes. So if you are including every team member in both the interview and the decision-making, they are personally invested in the success of that individual and really wanting to make sure that every team member can be successful in that process. We often see that people don't realize how much time it is needed to really set up a thorough hiring process, being intentional in who you're going to hire and figuring out your needs. And we actually think that leadership teams should be investing maybe 40 to 50% of their time on the hiring process, realizing that they're always doing some type of recruiting whenever they're talking about the company. They're also, there may be someone of interest that might be interested in that company. So really being very passionate about hiring and really building a rigorous foundation and not sacrificing quality over speed and getting that right candidate. I think that's one of the key things that we want you all to walk away with. With that in mind, the next thing that we really want to emphasize, we hear a lot in the Valley, there's this perception that you need to compete with the larger companies when it comes to compensation. How much should we pay? How much equity should we give? And we see a lot of founding teams over-index their time in trying to figure out what that right compensation is. And we are of the mindset that you shouldn't try to compete with these large companies because you will fail. You will never be able to pay the salary that Google pays, that Facebook pays, or the equity. And you shouldn't try to compete because there's so much more that companies have to offer that these companies can't. We both have worked with people who've come from Google, who've come from Apple, who've come from Microsoft, who have chosen startups not because of the salary, but because of other things. They believe in the purpose or the mission or the vision of the company. They want to have real clear impact. When you work at a big company, it's harder for you to see the impact that you're making. They want to be able to grow and be exposed to a diverse set of skills and opportunities. Large companies, you don't have that. They want to be able to learn from senior leaders and have that access to the CEO, to the founders, because startups are small and they're flat. So when we talk with companies, and they'll often approach us, like, how do you figure out the right compensation? There are some tools out there. You've probably heard of Option Impact or Option Driver. Great tools. If you haven't looked at them, I encourage you to check it out now. But come up with what you think the compensation might be, that right kind of philosophy or structure. But when you're engaging with candidates, don't over-index on the compensation. Over-index on much more of what your company has to offer and what you really want to bring to the table. So that's another thing that we really want to emphasize. Any questions on that topic? Because that tends to be a hot topic. Or comments. I know we've got experts in the room.
There was actually one on slide 1.
Yeah.
Where you talked about a committee decision rather than rather than presumably an individual or a fiat decision. Obviously, committees can get too big, they can get bogged down, and you have the problem of the thing that they can agree on is the lowest common denominator. Can you talk a little bit more about the committee, or maybe that's later in your presentation?
I'd love to talk about the committee because it's 2 slides in. So let me just skip ahead, and we want to flex. I'm going to move
that was the question that came up.
Yeah, that's a great question. So
I have a question to this slide.
Okay.
In a second.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. No, we'll come back to that. Yeah.
We'll take turns.
And the growth opportunities. So can you explain this further? Because I think I worked in corporates and enterprise, and now I'm in a startup. Well, my experience is that you have to bring a lot of knowledge to a startup, right? Because the startup is, you have to. I think that you can corporate because there are more people around you who can actually help you to develop yourself instead in a startup where you have to bring more knowledge.
So it's different types of knowledge and different types of learning.
Yeah.
So the benefit of a startup is you're going to get really broad exposure because you're often a utility player working in a lot of different areas. So you will learn an immense amount of a wide breadth at startups. When you work at a large company, you often learn best practices, rigor, precision, which is another different type of learning. So I think it depends on the individual and how they want to grow and how they want to develop, where if you've been exposed to best practices, you can bring some of those to the startup context, but then you can apply it to a broader breadth as well. That make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Great. Yeah.
And just one other comment. It's interesting that you bring this up because I think we try and do a lot of this when we're hiring because I've hired a lot of our team and our salaries are fairly low, especially for the Bay Area. And what I always focus on is not that. I say, hey, you're gonna have room for growth here, but like more than that, you're gonna have impact. We do team events, we do I tend to focus on all these things that are not compensation, and it actually gets us fairly good talent. So
Yeah.
if other people here are hiring for startups, I'd say that is really awesome and has worked really well for us.
Great.
Yeah, and understanding the candidate too, right? So really being clear on what you're presenting and if they are interested, and then kind of focusing on that aspect of it for them, and moving on from from candidates who may not be, right? And being willing to move on early and
Yeah.
still give them a good experience, which we'll talk about.
And to your point, paying too much for one person, more for one person in comparison maybe to their peers, and then you're recognizing what their motivations are is really compensation and not team culture and growth and development. And then you've got compensation disparity as well. And really what you're doing is you're rewarding someone for their negotiation skills. You don't know actually what their performance is going to be. So, having kind of that baseline as well.
Yeah. I do want to comment on what you raised about having experience. I think experience is important, but being in a startup, you also have the benefit of trying new things, of learning as you go, of failing, which is smaller risk, right? So knowing how to sort of hire for people who will take those risks, who have the smarts, who have kind of the cognitive ability to learn quickly and move quickly and have the agility, I think is important, because experience will be gained and the context changes so much. Experience will pretty quickly become, last year's experience. Yeah. So it's a balance. Of course, you do need that, but there's also the aspect of who can we bring in who will learn and can actually grow with the startup.
I have a question about senior leaders. When we talk about new candidates and what kind of benefits we can offer them about senior leaders, it's only about new knowledges or something else.
So what I like to emphasize, if the founder is someone who's known and recognized, or you have a senior, maybe technical leader or sales leader, to highlight that, because often in the size of the companies we often work with, they're smaller and they're going to get direct access to those individuals where they can learn formally or informally just by watching that individual, by seeing them in meetings, seeing how they work. That's great exposure. Or if there's an opportunity for more direct mentorship and collaboration on a project. In larger companies, they're often a few layers removed. They don't have that exposure. They don't have that access. And I think it's a great benefit to highlight within the startup context. Yeah. Other contributions to this, things that we're missing that you do that's not compensation related. Any other recommendations?
I have a kind of tangential question. So I've been in bigger companies and smaller companies. I myself is more of a startup person, but when I go out to recruit, one of my struggles is I feel like I've gained more in a startup, but when you market at big companies, does come with its reputation. So how do you convince your candidates that we will provide you the experience and it will compensate for the reputation part, or we'll give you a way to market your story so that you're a more marketable candidate beyond what we're able to offer you?
I think that hits a lot to what Shrave just said around risk. What larger companies can provide is reputation and less risk. Smaller companies tend to come with a bit more risk, so you'll tend to attract individuals that might be a bit more in the risk-taking profile, in addition to that breadth and exposure and learning opportunities. So I don't think that's a bad thing. I actually think it's going to help you attract the type of talent that you want in a really dynamic environment.
Yeah. So I would say cast a wider net, right? So make sure you're casting a wider net beyond just your network, to see who those people might be, who those candidates might be, who are talented and have the right fit and mindset for a startup. Because, like you said, not everybody is of the mindset or in a position, right? But there are, of course, a lot of people, really strong talent out there as well.
I can comment a little bit on
Please.
risk if you'd like.
Yeah.
So one of the issues that I think is a risk that potential hires at a startup have is that the startup is more likely to either fail or have chaos. So on their resume, if your resume is a bunch of big companies and you've lasted just 6 months, that's a very bad ding on your resume. But if you've been at startups, there's much higher turnover in I'll just say the startup ecosystem. So what's very important is to set the paradigm from the get-go that our company only hires fantastic people. We don't hire people that would fail at a company in 6 months. But because of the risk, we know that this is a risk you're taking. And if the risk goes down, we want you to know that we're committed as references that the issue was the company's business environment and not, and we're going to work with you to make sure you have a bunch of successes that you can report, even if ultimately the company, goes through either a challenge or even doesn't make it there.
That's great commitment as well, and culture and transparency. Thank you. So let's pop ahead and address your question around committee and decision making. And one of the things that I'll talk broadly and then I'll get to this specifically. One of the things we like to recommend is to have an intentional interview process, a structured process in place, even if it's your first hire or second hire. Reason is we all have blind spots. We all have things that we're looking at, and there are going to be things that we're missing, gaps that we're not seeing. And so what we like to recommend is bring together the founding team, the leader team, whoever's going to be involved in interacting with this candidate, and have a pre-discussion before you even write the job description. What is it that you think you need? What are the most essential skills that you think that you need? You might be the hiring manager, somebody else might be the hiring manager. They probably have gaps. They may not see all the different skills or things that are needed. So soliciting input from other team members on what you think that profile is and those skills are that are needed, and making sure that you actually really need to hire somebody. Sometimes there might be somebody else in-house who wants to grow in that area, or maybe has skills in that area and you don't realize. It could be a growth opportunity for them, and maybe you don't even have to hire somebody. But first, bringing together the folks that would interact with that individual together, defining the skills, defining the role, and getting aligned on what that profile looks like. Then, once you have everyone in the room, how are you going to assess those specific skills? Who's going to interview what specific area? Are they going to go deep into technology? They're going to go deep into culture fit, what those different pieces are, so that each person that's talking with that candidate knows what aspect of that candidate they're looking at, so there's not overlap and you don't miss anything. Then, after you go through the interview process, we recommend you bring everyone back into the room. You have each person individually talk about what their impression of the candidate was, how they performed on the questions, and then collectively you discuss overall, what do we think about this candidate? Do they meet our standards in the hiring bar? Are there gaps? Are there gaps with this candidate that maybe we're okay with or maybe we're not okay with? But what that provides is a much more comprehensive perspective on the candidate, where someone might see something that you didn't see or you did see. And then we also encourage a consensus by that group, and it doesn't have to be 10, 15 people. 4 or 5 people is probably the ideal number of interviewers, to come to that agreement on, is this someone that we think is going to help us raise the bar, we all can learn from, is going to be a positive value add. And there will always be some debate, natural debate. Debate is good, as long as it's healthy debate and you're moving it forward. Because if folks feel like they have made a collective agreement together, as I mentioned earlier, they're much more committed to the outcome of that. They're much more committed to the success of that individual person. I sat in hundreds of hiring committees at Google. It was committee-based. It was consensus-driven. And there were times when folks did not agree with a decision, but they respectfully disagreed. They identified what aspect they disagreed about, yet they were still fully committed to the person once they joined. And giving people that opportunity to raise that gives them a voice, but you also want them to be committed to this person once they join as well. And that's how we've seen really helpful structure. It doesn't have to be super structured. It can be lightweight, but a much more comprehensive approach in the hiring process. I know he had this specific question. He wasn't able to see the full answer, but are there other questions or comments that you all want to share?
Yeah, I have a question about determining culture fit. So how do you determine that in an equitable way? Because a lot of times what people really mean when they talk about culture fit is someone who is like me. And we have a big commitment to equity at my company, and I feel that that's very important for a team. So how do you address that? And maybe also address that with people who maybe aren't as experienced at dealing with equity issues.
Yeah, I've got two parts to that question. First, going back to the structured interview process, if you have an interview process where you know what skills you're assessing or what attributes you're assessing, and it's the same for every candidate, there's that consistency where your reference is this: do they have the skills? Do they have the abilities? There's research that shows when there are structured interview processes, you have greater validity and reliability in hiring better candidates because it's much more focused on the skills than unconscious biases that might be influencing. So that's one way to make sure that you're getting greater diversity in your candidates as well. Specifically to culture fit, I see a lot of startups, what they do is they reference their values. What do we stand for? We've got 3 or 4 values. And they look implicitly at how candidates respond to questions and alignment with their values. Rather than saying, say your company is really big on teamwork and transparency, and you ask the question, are you transparent? Do you value teamwork? Well, of course they're going to say they're transparent, and they're going to just beg the question and not really answer it. But you can infer based on how they answer other questions as, do they value transparency? Do they value teamwork? So, for example, they're describing a problem that they had to solve that was really gnarly. And as they're describing that, they talked about working with team members, working through problems, working through conflict. You can infer that those are their intrinsic values, and therefore it's a culture fit for your company. Does that help? Yep.
And then in the feedback, to actually articulate those aspects as well, in addition to the skills that they're bringing, right? So when you're having the discussion or however you're sort of sharing feedback, making sure that you do raise these aspects, I think will help create that common language, make those values more real and part of how you're hiring, how you're working, etc.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, please.
So when you say test their performance with real examples, could you give me an example of a couple of questions you would use to do that? Because I think that sometimes we have trouble with the people that are hiring to get those real examples out. So
Yeah.
I'd love to just hear.
Yeah, what I love when companies take a real problem they're having or a problem they had, if it's confidential, a previous problem, and say, what would you do if in this scenario, and describe a real life situation that your team has had to tackle, or maybe modify it slightly to make it confidential, and have them talk through the process. You're making it as context specific as possible, and it's much more likely for you to assess their ability in the real working environment than just some hypothetical, theoretical situation that's not even relevant to your company. So again, just try to take a real problem you're working with or a previous problem and have them, how would you tackle this? Yeah.
Can
Yeah,
I
please,
piggyback on that?
please.
So at our company, we have all of our candidates go through a case study process. It's actually more of like a situational based interview, but I think that this could be super helpful. It can be really lightweight. You bring them in, you give them an hour by themselves to review about 300 words worth of text. And basically what we want to see them do is hop up on the whiteboard, sketch out how they lay out the project plan, the things that they'd accomplish, deliverables that they would create. And for most of the folks that we're hiring, this should be an exercise. It doesn't require any prep. They've been doing this for years. And for those who struggle with it, that gives us a really good idea as to kind of how they would actually do on their job maybe a month or two from so candidates walk out of there knowing how they did, right? So they saw their performance, whether it was really good or really poor, so that when I call them afterwards and I do a debrief, they kind of know where they stand already, right? It's pretty apparent. And to go back to the culture fit question that you asked, oftentimes I'll get feedback and it'll be like, you know what, I want to pass on this candidate because I don't feel that they're a culture fit. And what we've adopted as a policy at Slalom is that that is not an acceptable thing to ding someone on. So I'm going to invalidate what you just said, right? You need to come at me and give me some actionable reasons why you're passing, right? And just really force kind of the interview team to get deeper besides just using what is kind of a cop-out answer, which is, you know what, like, it's a culture fit issue. I just didn't quite, like, connect with them. It's like, well, that's not sufficient and it's not legally defensible. So
Yeah.
I need to
What evidence do you have? What happened?
Totally,
What
yeah.
did they say? That I love
try
it.
to push back a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I hear you, but I think there's probably something that led to that, and work with them to surface that.
Yeah.
Great.
Could not underscore that more. That's very important.
Building on the experiential exercise, I've seen different approaches. Some companies give it to the candidates when they show up on site. Some companies send it in advance and say, we're actually going to give you this exercise, or we're going to talk through this so that individuals can prepare. I think there's a variety of different approaches that you might take. Thank you.
Actually, so
Yeah.
we do two
Yeah.
For our strategy and operations consultants who, as part of their job, have to turn around beautiful slide decks really fast to like executive level candidates. We make them create decks, just a couple slides in a 48-hour window, because that kind of mimics like the velocity at which they'd be operating under.
Yep.
For some of our other consultants, that sort of like velocity and that sort of acumen around building beautiful like decks is less relevant, right? So again, it's dependent upon what the needs are for that job, and that's how we but at the end of the day, we want to see you create something original for us.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you for contributing.
So all this captures kind of the point that Candice made earlier, which is speed versus quality and taking your time. These things might feel like, oh, I don't have the time, right? I need this person now, because usually by the time you make the decision to hire, it's because it's already too late, right? So, but making sure you're not rushing into, you're not just hiring the first person or someone so and so's friend or this person that you used to work with, and even if you have worked with them before, having them go through the process is really important for all the reasons we've already talked to.
Yeah. And one other slide we added in here was a recognition around unconscious bias I referenced. Biases, we all have unconscious biases. We are exposed to 1,000 different stimuli every second. We can't process everything. So our brain creates shortcuts based on our life and our history. There are biases that we have. And so in the interview process, they often pop up. And so some common biases that could influence who you hire is affinity bias. We tend to hire people that are like us. Same gender, same race, same ethnicity, same university, etc. So we don't have a very diverse set. We tend to look at confirmation bias, where we make snap judgments within the first 10 milliseconds of meeting somebody that then influences if we're going to hire that person or not. So being aware of that, we often then tend to only look at things that validate our first impression, and we don't look at things that counter it. So there's a number of different types of biases where if you have a more structured process that's grounded in skills and attributes that's consistent for every candidate, these are ways to help mitigate biases that we all have, and so we want to take action against. Another thing that we wanted to emphasize was you are always recruiting, and you are even indirectly recruiting folks. And so there will be candidates that you decide not to move forward on for whatever reason. You want to make sure that every candidate you engage with, formally or informally, has a really good impression of your company when they walk away. If people have a bad candidate experience, research shows that they will tell on average 3 other people. The valley is small. It is very competitive to get great talent, and you do not want to get a reputation out there and being having a poor candidate experience. People won't waste their time as well. So finding ways to make sure that every candidate has a great experience, and that doesn't have to be gifts and all the bells and whistles. It's be respectful of their time, let them know what to expect, be prepared, follow up in a timely manner, keep them engaged. Just really the elements of respect, I think, are the key piece. And I know that we often are so busy and this might not be someone I'm going to move forward on, but you've got to close them out appropriately in a respectful manner. Otherwise, they will share other folks. And there's research that shows candidates that really kind of were borderline or not wanting to move forward with a with an offer or a company, if they have a really good experience, you can change their mind just in the quality of that experience, and vice versa. They may have been really interested in your company, but a negative experience, it's going to turn them off, and they're going to tell their friends. So you just want to be really respectful of folks and their time. You may not want to hire them now. You may want to hire them a year from now or 2 years from now when you need a different skill set. You always want to keep those doors open. Any questions or comments to this?
Agree 100% because I've definitely done both. When I have a positive one, I tell people and it changes my mind, and when I have a negative one, I tell even more than 3 people about it.
Yeah. Please.
When you are, let's say, just like giving that final communication that they didn't get the job or that they're moving someone else, do you have any tips and tricks on how to make that really positive communication, even though it's bad news?
I'm happy to. I feel like I've been talking. Do you want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. Well, so timeliness, making sure that and you do it in person. A lot of people kind of revert to email, which feels really impersonal, but picking up the phone and giving and sharing not only the news, but also why, right? So being as candid as possible on why this didn't work out this time, what was something, and then if they ask, what can I do differently for the future? Be open to that. So make it as personal and professional as possible, and that'll always go a long way.
Yeah, I remember a job I didn't get. They gave me some feedback, and I always think of that feedback whenever I go for future interviews. I'm so appreciative that they gave me that feedback because they were right. I hadn't realized that, and so making it worth their time and their investment. They just spent several hours with you. They maybe didn't get the job, but maybe they learned from it. So if you can be transparent and share it, I would encourage companies to do so.
So I make these phone calls every day. And when I first started in this role, I hated it. This is the thing that I absolutely just did not look forward to. And I avoided it sometimes in the beginning. And eventually, like, a couple things happened for me. Like, one, I was so scared that people were going to, like, react, like, angrily or get defensive. I just didn't want to be. I wanted to avoid the conflict. And I found that, like, so rarely do candidates, like, get angry or defensive, right? So your fears are far overblown. And second, like, sharing feedback, like you just shared, is like they don't get it. Like, so many candidates go through these processes and they don't hear a whisper, right? So, like, for the opportunities that they get to someone to share this feedback with them, it's like blows their mind sometimes. And suddenly, like, they're like super appreciative, and you're like, wow, I'm like doing this person a favor. And you're like, wow, I did not think this conversation was going to go this way. Now I feel good, right? And even though we're breaking up with you, right? And then I always end it by saying, listen, I talked to a lot of people in the Valley. We saw some really good things. For whatever reason, the alignment wasn't there. But if you're sincere, I'd say it's like, I'd be happy to, like, broker an introduction if there's someone that I'm connected to at another company that you're looking to explore opportunities with. I know you're in the market. And they say, like, that's really nice. I appreciate that. Less than 5% of people ever take me up on that offer. It is a genuine offer. But, like, the point is, like, they hang up the phone. They're like, hey, it didn't work out, but, like, I feel like I got some feedback. And also, I now have one more person in my network that could potentially help, right?
Yeah.
So I think if you can do those two things, yet, and going back to the primacy effect, right? We remember things that happened at the beginning and at the end. And if that's their memory of their final interaction with your company and your brand, then, like, you're setting your brand up for success.
Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. And always overestimate the power of networks, right? Not today. 5 years from now, you may run into the same person or remember them for some reason, or know someone who knows them.
Or they might be interviewing you.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Great. And then one other thing we wanted to highlight is common mistakes. I actually stole this from Satya Nadella at Homebrew. He wrote a great blog post, and so I took some of the key highlights from there. So one, don't underestimate how much time hiring and recruiting takes. Really, we believe 40 to 50% of your time until you've got a scalable process. Don't overlook attitude for aptitude. So this person may be a rock star in artificial intelligence, and they're going to completely transform the technology of your company. But if this person is a jerk, they will destroy your company. You want them to be amazing in all aspects and have a really high standard as well. That attitude is really critical. Earlier stages for startups, you probably are going to hire for breadth. You're probably going to hire generalists, utility players. You may need one or two deep experts. Know how many you need, and hire those few. It's probably just going to be a handful. But earlier on, you're going to probably hire for breadth, and then later on, as the company grows, then you're going to hire more specialists with deeper expertise. That tends to be the trend. People often ask, at what point do you do that? At what size? Is it 50 people, 150 people? It really depends on your company and where you're needing to build out, so it's hard to give a generic answer. But early stages, we would over-index on breadth rather than depth or niche expertise. Look outside your network. We talked about diversity, inclusion, and companies that have more diverse. They're more innovative. They're better problem solvers. They actually have better financial results as well. But our networks tend to be people that look like us, who think like us. And so we often reach out to friends or friends of friends initially when we're hiring. You're going to hire a lot of people that look like you and think like you, and that's not going to really benefit the growth of your company. So look outside your network, ask for peripheral references as well as much as possible. And then last, you will make a hiring mistake. Every company has made a hiring mistake. Every company has hired somebody that they've had to no longer have with the company. Recognize that really quickly. Keeping that person on too long could negatively impact the team and the company direction as well. So give that person feedback. Give them an opportunity to improve. If you're not seeing that feedback quickly, maybe now's the time to exit rather than doing destruction with the team. Any comments or questions on some of these points? Okay, let's talk about teams. Do you want to jump ahead?
Sure. So I'm looking at the time. We have 4 more minutes. So I'm trying to kind of, I'm remembering the questions that came up about teams. And I think you had a question about how to motivate teams.
How to help them to grow.
And how to help teams grow?
Yes.
Okay. When you say grow, what do you mean?
I mean, how we can help them to develop, for example, soft skills, how we can help them to decide different conflicts in their team and others.
Okay. Okay. So that's 2 parts. And let me address the first one, which is the motivation. So in terms of motivation, one of the things that we think about a lot and advise a lot on is for leaders and managers and anybody in the company to think about how to make the experience of an individual as personal as possible. So let's talk about the day they start. How do you welcome this new individual into the company? Making sure that you're actually, they don't show up at 8 a.m. and there's no one there to receive them, right? Making sure that they are received by not only who's the team they're going to be working with, but also having the founder or the CEO or some leader spending time talking about the company, talking about their vision, why they were hired, what we're looking forward to. So kind of starting off on that right foot of, you are so welcome here, we're so happy to have you. After that, really getting to know the individual's perspective. Why did they come? What kind of motivates them? What gets them out of bed every morning? What are they looking to learn? What are they expecting, right? And keeping those notes for every person that you bring into the company is really key, because that's how you keep them motivated throughout, right? Knowing this is all the work. There's a lot of work, right, in startups. But assigning work based on what people are interested in growing and learning about, aside from what they're good at, right? So kind of balancing those two, that's how they'll see that you're investing in me, and so I'm going to invest back in you, right, as a company. There's so much competition around here. People are getting poached all the time. People are trying to get recruited, all the time. We all receive how many LinkedIns every day, right? How do you keep the person every day feeling like I'm in the right place? I really want to make a difference. Right, so that's keeping it top of mind is really important. On the team dynamic aspect, so again, thinking about that first, investing in it first is really important. Having the team get to know each other on a personal level, doing offsites. It sounds kind of like, really, like, do we have a day, we're a startup, we have no time to pause, right? But taking half a day, taking 2 hours, and letting the team getting to know each other in sort of a more structured way. So doing team building exercises, there's so many, we can talk offline about what some of those might be that'll resonate with the environment in your company. But also putting on calendar things like, weekly lunches, or a team that goes out together and like does things together, right? Knowing, keeping those personal connections, I think, is really important, because what happens is, when you're moving really quickly, when there's like fast decisions to be made, when you're not agreeing about something, being able to be completely candid, give quick feedback, and then move quickly is really important. And that only comes when you feel that personal connection with each other and feel that psychological safety, have that trust. So building that foundation of trust is the most important.
I can add on that. A team is like a relationship. It's like a marriage. And it takes a lot of time and investment and processing. You can't take for granted that the marriage is going to work, and you can't take for granted that the team is just going to work. And so, to Shrav's point, just building in that time to invest in it.
Yeah.
In that relationship.
And knowing that even one new member changes the dynamic, right? So even though it feels like, oh, you have to do this again or think about it again, it is important. You're constantly keeping that sort of well-oiled machine going. Any other input to that point? All right. We'll go ahead and share just kind of a framework that we like to think about for just thinking about how to sort of lead or manage teams or lead people. It's really important to be clear on the direction that you're going as a startup. As a startup, it changes all the time, right? But being clear and being able to articulate that and share that is really important. And always bringing it back to, we're doing this because we want to go here, right? So never feeling like, you couldn't repeat it enough, because people will always remember what the last thing that they heard, right? So setting clear direction, investing the time on motivating each team member, as we just talked about, making that investment. Feedback is super important. Making sure you have feedback loops. So not just getting feedback from others, but also giving feedback. As a founder, you're giving feedback or receiving feedback from the board, from your team. The team members are giving each other feedback, creating that environment of psychological safety where you can share and receive feedback appropriately, where it's not feeling like an attack, right, is really important. And then holding people accountable. If we spend the time to tell them what's expected of them, or how they can be viewed as being valuable and making an impact, giving that feedback to them and holding them accountable is important, right? Because otherwise, they're not sure. They're not sure what's happening. Is my work being appreciated or not? Did I spend all weekend working on this? Did anyone care? Keeping that feedback going is really important, and making sure that they deliver. And if not, giving them the opportunity to understand what the expectations of delivering are. Often, if there isn't that clearly expressed expectation, then we can't just assume that they will know. And then, so while we're doing all of that, the thing that I think we want to underscore, we've talked about diversity and inclusion. It's really important to have that as being part of your environment, part of the company. Everyone should be aware that it's not, and Candice mentioned, having a variety or diversity in how people think, not just kind of your normal, gender, race, etc., but also bringing in alternate points of view. That'll really help your company grow. And then communicating as much as possible all the time to as many people as possible, up, down, across, is going to be super key, especially with changes. I think there was a comment earlier where with startups, things change all the time. You're pivoting, you're trying to make adjustments. Often you're moving so fast that you don't make the time to communicate, and that's what creates a lot of confusion with the rest of the team, right? So making sure that you're always communicating. We are over time.
We started a little late, so we kind of let it go a little bit, but probably want to wrap up in just a couple minutes. I don't know if you want to open it for questions.
Yeah, I think we can.
Yeah, let's do that. We want to be respectful of your time.
Actually, selfishly had one, so. But I noticed I've, experienced this a lot in the, just that kind of hires and diversity, inclusivity touch points that you made. And I'm wondering, I know that's kind kind of like the easiest option for, you know, like a hiring manager to look within their own network. I know that's, you know, we love referrals. That's a way that I've seen a lot of people function. Do you have any tactics or like tools that you've seen people use that have been effective to get outside that network, to get, you know, at the interview process, just for your pipeline to look a little bit more diverse? How have people done that really successfully?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's so many sort of platforms out there, right, that will have all kinds of talent and really strong talent, and there's hire.com, etc., that do a lot of really good work in identifying and kind of funneling at least kind of some baseline match of people that may not be in your normal networks. But also, I think companies that invest in spending time going out there to events and or hosting events and attracting a diverse group of people, or going to a different location, kind of thinking about it in a more creative way, I think is really useful, and spending time in blasting that you're looking for talent in as many avenues as possible, as opposed to just your networks.
Please.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Robert, and I've hired and built lots of diverse teams in my past, but one thing that challenges us is hiring women in engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a friend who has a woman's company about women's empowerment. They're building software. She can't hire women. Her goal is to be at least 50% women engineers. The company, they're at 7% after 3 years. Are there any examples of firms that have successfully recruited and retained women in engineering?
We have 100% women engineers right now.
I
just wanted to brag about
Oh, you do? Okay.
We have 2 right now.
Are they available?
Yeah, so, but I didn't hire them, so I can't.
So I just want to know if there have been successful companies. Today's New York Times or Washington Post had an article about Nike. Nike's features diversity as one of their core missions, yet only 7% of their employees are African American. So a company is focused on it, it's part of their culture, yet they fail. It says to me it may not be possible unless you can kind of help me, point me to successful models for doing that.
I think that I've got a lot of thoughts there. There's no silver bullet. There's no one thing that a company can do to achieve those numbers. It is a systemic investment across everything that you do, both engaging with candidates and your employees. One of the things you said is diversity and inclusion. It can't just stop at having diverse representation. They also need to feel included. They need to feel like they belong and there's equality within the company. Otherwise, they're going to leave. So all of that hard recruiting that you've done has been wasted as well. So I think that, and also, I want to push back. I don't think it's realistic to expect to have 50% men and women in engineering when you look at the graduation rates of women. I know that it's increasing, which is great, but it's still maybe 21% of the graduates. So at a minimum, a company should strive for representation of graduation rates, if not more. And I think that's a more realistic goal, be it. But I think that there are companies out there that do deep analyses of your diversity pipeline, like Paradigm. It's a company that I know Shrave has engaged with and thinks highly of, where they will come in and do an analysis of all the different touch points of candidates, provide recommendations and tools internally as well. But I can't think of a company that I know of that has nailed it in every way. But there are companies that are making good strides.
I know there are tools to even look at your recruitment language to make sure
Absolutely.
it's biased towards, not biased towards men, but it's just a particular problem in this space. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for whether it's women or any other type of hiring, the talent pool is important, right? So even if you think about where you are located and what the talent pool looks like, and should we be looking beyond?
If we could do visas now, it would be easy. But recruiting people from India now on visas is really impossible for an early stage startup to do.
Yeah. A lot of companies are thinking creatively around, do we need everyone be physically located in a particular place, right? And there's so much now technology now to be able to work, in a distributed way, that companies are using that as the model for their talent.
Yep.
One thing I'd suggest
Yeah.
on it too is, I have a lot of female friends that are engineers, and a lot
Talk
of
to
them
Robert.
are part of,
Link into your network.
a lot of them are part of like the meetup groups and the like girls who code, like that sort of
Yes.
thing, and they're really involved with that because it's something that they're passionate about too, like getting more women in engineering. So I'd say like, especially in the Bay Area, there are a lot of groups like that, and like because you're not a woman, you may not be able to go to the events, but you can probably
You don't know
reach
that.
out to that's true. But I would say one suggestion would be to maybe reach out to the people that are the head of those groups and say, hey, we're hiring, can you blast this to your network?
Yep.
So.
And they say, Robert, if I find any great engineers, I'm hiring them.
Yeah, they probably will. There's Project Include where they've got a lot of great
No, I
resources.
think
All
Yeah.
those.
that
Great.
it's-
Okay.
I think diversity really helps the team. And then just a couple of comments. Having succeeded and failed in building great teams, I think the most important thing about a startup is that this pivot thing is just ridiculous. A good startup does not pivot frequently. And one of the things that frustrates employees is where the leadership is always kind of changing the direction and focus of the company. And that unnerves people, and that does not create this community of trust. And without the trust, you can't weather the storms of any company. So I would put number one on the how do you build great teams and keep great teams, creating that environment of trust. As a
Absolutely.
leader,
Great.
you have to stay focused.
Yeah.
And if you pivot too often, it makes everyone nervous, makes everyone feel like they don't really know where they're going, they feel like they've wasted their time in the past, and you're not really able to move forward. And I think that pivot thing is a complete myth. When you look at companies like Impossible Foods, they set out with a mission, and they stuck with their mission. If you look at Google, they set out with their mission, and they stayed with their core mission until just a few years ago. So, that pivot thing, I think, if any of you are young leaders, and I think you all are in a way, one way or the other, pivoting is not necessarily a good thing to do.
Sometimes you have to do it, but have it be thoughtful and
Yeah.
intentional and well
Sometimes you have to do
researched.
it, but
Yep.
Continue, as
Yep.
a leader, continually changing your direction or focus, just
Right, and I think what you touched upon something that's important, which is kind of balancing what's happening, the business realities, with what you're sharing, right?
Yes.
So being completely, clear on where you're going, even if there's other stuff going on in the background. Of course, there's always stuff that's going on in the background, right? But balancing how you're communicating that out and being very clear and cognizant that as the leader, everyone is looking to you, right? So you don't want to appear schizophrenic or something like that. But you want to appear as someone who's transparent and is bringing the company along.
I tend not to be transparent when I'm panicking at home. Because things happen.
Right, but then you think about it and you share what's
Yes.
appropriate.
Yes.
All right, I think we're gonna wrap things up there. We want to
Yeah.
do a friendly
Thank
sign.
you.
Thank
Yeah,
you
yeah.
so much.
Thank you.